Hello everyone, and welcome to a guide to Pokemon Insurgence's Mega Eevee from a Draft League perspective. I'm your host of the Pastel Orchids S, and, well, let's just jump right into it, because this Pokemon's a bit of a doozy. The basics of Mega Eevee. This is normally the spot where I go around talking about base stat lines and typings and general nature of abilities, what a Pokemon's role on a team is, when it gets taken in Insurgence Drafts. But everything I'm showing you right here is blatant lies, because Mega Eevee's ability, Protean Maxima, is a massive piece of work that really only makes sense the more you dig into it. Mega Eevee is not actually one Pokemon. It is more like 8, or 9, maybe. 8's probably the better way of summarizing it. There's technicalities therein. Mega Eevee can transform into any Eeveelution on a whim. It will do so at the start of each turn, and it will transform to the form corresponding to a move it is using. Insurgence has an in-game move tutor that allows Eevees to learn 2 moves of each of the Eeveelution types, which are Fire, Water, Electric, Psychic, Dark, Grass, Ice, and Fairy. When Eevee assumes its new form, it will take on all of that form's stats, including its speed. Its HP amount will change a little bit depending on the HP stat of the Eeveelution in question, anywhere from the 65s of Flareon to the 130s of Vaporeon. Mega Eevee will also have a secondary ability corresponding to whichever form it's actively in. The original Gen 1 trio, Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon, will give you the corresponding immunity abilities, Flash Fire, Water Absorb, Volt Absorb. Espeon and Umbreon will give you Magic Bounce and Synchronize, respectively, because those are the actually better abilities on those mons. Leafeon and Glaceon's abilities seem fairly useless at first glance. You get Chlorophyll and Snow Cloak. You'd be correct about the latter's uselessness. We will talk more about Chlorophyll later. And then Sylveon gets Cute Charm because Pixelate doesn't actually do anything. Crucially, while Mega Eevee will transform into its elemental forms when it uses those elemental moves, it will go back to normal upon using any normal attack, including normal status moves. We'll get into the implications of that later. The primary gist of Mega Eevee's kit lies within its 8 forms, and I've sort of split them into 4 pairs. We've got the speed duo, the tank duo, the physical duo, and the utility duo. You can see the exact moves here. I'm not exactly going to go over all of them. But yeah, feel free to just take a quick peek if there's anything relevant here. Most of these are special options because most Eeveelutions are special attackers by nature. Umbreon's the only one that goes full physical. Leafeon and Flareon each have 1 physical move and 1 special move. There are a few other options outside of just these moves that Eevee would learn in later generations, most relevantly Alluring Voice for Sylveon and Trailblaze for Leafeon. Alluring Voice in particular doesn't have a ton of potential use because Moonblast is just generically stronger, and you're likely not going for confusion. Trailblaze could have some really interesting work done. I haven't seen Trailblaze Mega Eevee show up or do much within my personal experience, but it's a potentially interesting option. So this is the gist of Mega Eevee's kit. But how does this actually work? It's usually best to go 1 to 2 forms at a time. To start out, we have the speed duo, Jolteon and Espeon. These are the primary options you'll be using to actually go fast and hit first with Mega Eevee. It doesn't really help that many of Eevee's forms have subpar defensive uses. Jolteon is the core of Mega Eevee's identity because of one move, Volt Switch. With Jolteon in the mix, you can start vaulting in and out of pretty much everything, and every other Eeveelution somehow will interact with being a Jolteon. Every form interacts with every other form in some way, just by nature of having so many different options you can cover. But I generally select Jolteon as being the baseline that I measure everything else off of. Espeon is sort of your backup speed option. Sometimes having a fast electric isn't exactly what you're going for. Magic Bounce has some occasional use. Sometimes you really just need a psychic option if you want to whack a poison, a fighter, what have you. Or even just a fast ground that you can't hit with Jolteon. These two forms are the only way Mega Eevee will naturally be above base 100 speed, so keeping them in mind is particularly relevant. Because they're the only ways Mega Eevee can be above 100 speed, if you can not worry about these forms as the opponent and be reasonably fast, for example like a Garchomp, then yeah, there are going to be a couple of issues. Jolteon and Espeon don't really have too much defensive use, but the tank duo of Vaporeon and Sylveon definitely do. Mega Eevee doesn't often invest in its defensive stats because it wants to optimize for being a Jolteon a fair bit, but the sheer bulk lines of Vaporeon and Sylveon can go a long way in certain matchups. I did contain a note of don't expect to heal, though. Protean Maxima, Mega Eevee's ability, is harmed by how Wish interacts with it. Wish, for those who don't remember, is a normal move, meaning Mega Eevee will, at the start of the turn, transition into its base Mega Eevee form rather than being in any of its Eeveelutions. This form is a pure normal type with 83 in every base stat. Not super great for trying to take hits and heal up. Worse still, it means you have to use Protect too, so you've only got 2 move slots for pretty much everything Mega Eevee wants to do. There's a lot of weirdness with Mega Eevee, specifically in how it chooses to invest in its stats. I'll talk more about that later. Sylveon's Moonblasts and Vaporeon's Hydro Pumps or Scalds are some of the strongest smacks you can start wailing on things with. Espeon's Psychics, I believe, are the next best special option. And then for physical, would be Flareon's Flare Blitz, depending on how you're really partitioning things. Due to Flareon's involvement, you can engage with the Delta Chandelure trademarked Fairy Fire stab combo. Granted, you're stuck at 60s in speed for that, but, you know, sometimes you work with what you can work with. Then we've got the physical duo, Flareon and Leafeon, the only ways you'll ever be using physical attacks with Mega Eevee. Flareon's the true mixed option of the kit. You can usually go 3 special moves and then just tackle on Flare Blitz and trust Flareon's massive attack stat holds up to this day to do enough work on the physical end to just smack whatever special tank you need to. The recoil damage is sort of unfortunate, but Mega Eevee usually isn't sticking around for terribly long anyway. And if you really need to use Fire Blast instead, you can use Fire Blast instead. Leafeon is never going to be useful as a special option. 60 special attack and having to attack with a 75 base power move will do that to you. But 110 on the physical end and the strong Leaf Blade as your option means you've got some ability to tango with stuff. This is going to be your best option for big special walls, specifically special walling waters, like Delta Regice and Mega Milotic, because Jolteon just does not do as much damage and you're hitting these guys weaker defense. Additionally, Chlorophyll is surprisingly relevant. We will get into that later. Finally, we have the utility duo. These two forms aren't really that useful for what they are in isolation. They're more so useful for what they represent within the context of the Pokemon as a whole. For Glaceon, that means bolt beaming stuff. I mentioned that Espeon's 130 attack clicking a 90 base power move is one of the strongest stuff you're going to get. Glaceon matches that pound for pound, all while interacting with Volt Switch just the way you want. You've got the ability as Mega Eevee to cook every single ground type under the sun because they're all weak to one of these types between water, grass, and ice. You don't have access to Freeze Dry, which does stink, and Glaceon, of course, leaves you stuck as a slow ice type for a turn, but you really get what you give in a trade-off for Ice Beam's great power. Umbreon is by far the worst form out of the 8. It's not really Umbreon's fault. Its role just doesn't interact with what Mega Eevee's trying to do very well, and it's harmed by the wish mechanics. A relative lack of offensive stats, combined with the two options you've got being Foul Play and Pursuit on a Pokemon that's otherwise trying to be very offensive, just means Umbreon doesn't really get you super far. If you want to try bulky Mega Eevee doing stuff like Wish, Protect, Foul Play, Scald, though, that could be very interesting, and I look forward to seeing that if you really want to go for it. I just haven't figured out a way where that's better than any other stuff that Eevee can do. So what does this all mean? Having 8 different stab types in addition to normal means Mega Eevee is a mixed attacker of unparalleled proportions. It will basically have perfect neutral coverage on you, completely guaranteed. Mixed attacking is a very real thing, and it's going to hit most of your roster for super effective damage somehow between its 4 moves. However, half of these forms have speed stats stuck in the 60s, and if Mega Eevee wants to go any sort of fast, it has to attack with an electric move or a psychic move. This can often mean Mega Eevee gets a little bit telegraphed in offense mirrors, just by virtue of not being able to use its coverage moves first. I touched on this a little bit earlier as well, but Mega Eevee's investment in its stats doesn't shift while its base stats do. So you might have to take on the form of a Vaporeon that would love to have invested in one of its defenses, but you're stuck investing in special attack and speed because that's what you need Jolteon to invest in. Wishing, forcing Eevee into its base form, also isn't doing you any favors. So how do we build a Mega Eevee set? You're really working with a toolbox of options, so you pick something to build around, and you build around that, taking whatever forms and other options you need to fill in the gaps. I personally like using Jolteon as my baseline, because hit-and-run attackers of Mega Eevee's caliber are difficult to come by, especially when they threaten every single electric resistance that could possibly exist. By resistance, I more so mean every ground, because those are the things that block Volt Switch. You might have some problems dealing with opposing electrics or stuff that's immune to electric. Mega Eevee's defensive profile doesn't really give you too many options on that front, outside of potentially slinging toxics at things. That is a good thing to note that I did not mention earlier. If you are using a move that does not correlate to one of Mega Eevee's 9 forms, you will stay in whatever form you're in. Usually this is just toxic, but I think there are a few others. None immediately come to mind. I don't think anybody's running Sand Attack in 2025. The most common Mega Eevee sets by far are 4 attacks and Calm Mind. You saw it on the slide earlier. Calm Mind makes you take up the form of Espeon, and it really changes how Mega Eevee works and functions. You're still largely focusing around the same base types, but the rough graph changes. The graph I have included here is entirely opinionated. Umbreon is the least generically useful form. Jolteon is the most generically useful form for the 4 attacks variant in particular. Everyone else mishmashed in the middle. That can all be debated. It's whatever you really feel like. So this was just a rough approximation. You don't need to treat this like some sort of gospel. You don't always need a water move to go with your Jolteon. Sometimes their ground is a Delta Torterra, and so having the grass option is the best option for you. Maybe you're dealing with Delta Regirock, and as such Vaporeon doesn't work at all, so you need Glaceon to fill that hole. It's really a matter of identifying the coverage options you need with electric as your baseline. You can use a different type as your baseline and then just have Volt Switch be an extra option. That's part of the strength of Mega Eevee. Absolutely go for it. Most Insurgence rosters, however, do incentivize you to have that 130 speed stat in your back pocket for whatever you need, whatever you've got to work with. 130 speed is pretty powerful. But I did mention Calm Mind. How does Calm Mind change things? Well, if you're Calm Minding, you're probably more wanting to stay in with your Eevee rather than constantly leave through virtue of Volt Switch. So you're probably dropping Volt Switch, but you still want the speed. So Thunderbolt is going to really make a bigger splash here. Calm Mind turning you into Espeon means Espeon's value immediately shoots up. Trying to chuck hazards out in Mega Eevee's face is already a little bit of a risk, but with Calm Mind, it becomes an even greater one. Because we're more focused on going hard special, the physical duo tanks in viability, and Pokemon that are more able, Pokemon whose roles more benefit to staying in, stuff like the tanky options of Sylveon and Vaporeon, those improve drastically. Is there anything else to note about Calm Mind? I don't actually believe so. Calm Mind can turn Eevee into a great threat, especially if you're really a psycho. You could try to couple this with Trailblaze and just run off of 2 attacking moves. I probably wouldn't, but more power to you if you'd like to. So how do we build a team around Mega Eevee? I talked about a set, but what about a team? You've got a hit-and-run attacker with incredible coverage, but occasionally unimpressive power, particularly when facing Neutral Bulk. However, Neutral Bulk, very difficult to come by. It has a few wonky problems with its own speed stat, but nothing that can't really be fixed. So we want to promote a hit-and-run game plan, or let it Calm Mind, so try to take some pressure off, while circumventing its occasional problems with Neutral Bulk, and give it more opportunities. So, breaking, absolute staple. Getting Mega Eevee some kind of powerful buddy who really just wants to smack stuff hard for tons of damage, however you really feel like it. It can be physical or special, whatever you want. I would say Rune Gross and Delta Chandelure come to mind, but those are likely to be taken in round 1 with Mega Eevee anyway, so you'll probably have to figure things out on your own. Mega Eevee is kind of a pivot spammer if you want to accompany Eevee with more fast pivot switch move spamming options, stuff like Cinderace, Greninja, even slower options, Galarian, Slowking, and Mandibuzz come to mind. That would be great. Hazards on both sides of the coin. Absolutely fantastic if we're going off of this pivot move setting playstyle. Sticky Web can help with the speed problem. You're not exactly slow enough to be good in Trick Room. Your slowest forms are really about 65 or 60 speed. Not fantastic. I have not seen Mega Eevee Trick Room do much. I have not seen it work. But if you want to try for it, that seems really fun. And then we get to the 5th bullet point on those conclusions. Sun. I dropped hints about the Sun earlier. So let's talk about the Sun. Sun flips Mega Eevee's entire profile on its head, simply because Leafeon's got Chlorophyll. Now you have a Chlorophyll sweeper with stab fire moves in Flareon's kit, as well as everything else that Mega Eevee is naturally doing. While these sets definitely spec more physical because you're making use of Leaf Blade as your primary attack so that you can be fast in the sun, and you're using Flare Blitz as Leaf Blade's primary partner, you've still got a whole host of other options you can work with throughout the other forms. Mega Eevee is a mixed attacker through and through, and Sun really capitalizes on this. You're not reliant on the weather whatsoever. All of these Pokemon are generally fine on their own, especially if it's the combination of them that Mega Eevee provides. So it acts a lot like a Paradox. Yeah, we have a Mega that's a Paradox in this format. Crazy stuff. The ability to go first with moves that aren't just electric and psychic, and present a more real threat from the physical side, is incredibly powerful, as well as just boosting up those Flare Blitzes, because holy moly, Sun boosted Flareon Flare Blitz does damage. You die fast. They die faster. But what about weaknesses? How are we beating a Mega Eevee from the opposing side? Because I always like to talk about that in these sorts of videos. Well, for one, we've got pretty much zero defensive utility on Mega Eevee's part. You're always switching in as Eevee's base form. 83s across the board, pure normal typing. Vulnerable to every form of hazard, even if you go to Espeon afterward. That's just not a profile that's conducive to switching in on stuff. In addition, depending on what exactly your offensive guys are as the opponent, Mega Eevee may only be able to outspeed you using moves that you resist. So Mega Eevee functionally doesn't outspeed you. Only being fast when using certain moves is a very big deal, and is something that both players will have to consider. Sure, it might change to a bulkier form to try to take your hit and knock you out in return, but that's what pivoting, mind games, all sorts of manner of nonsense is for. Mega Eevee can occasionally have problems with Pokemon it can't hit for super effective damage. It's often going mixed and relying on its coverage. If you just have a Ghost, or a Normal, or an Electric, something that it can't hit for super effective damage, you might be able to take its hits and heal them off. It depends on which hits you're taking, if Mega Eevee's in the sun, if Calm Mind is really in the mix. But some Pokemon like Galarian Slowking shut Eevee down fairly hard. Some of Mega Eevee's forms have a bit of a bad habit of stepping on each other's toes. Flare Blitz recoil, Hazard Chip, making it more difficult for Vaporeon and Sylveon to function. Jolteon wanting speed means Vaporeon doesn't have bulk. Vaporeon getting bulk means Jolteon's not going to have speed. Trying to invest in Leafeon and Flareon's physical attack means you're going to have less power out of Jolteon's moves, which is already a point of struggle for it. And as mentioned earlier, taking a hit from something and hitting it back, the combination of the two isn't necessarily always possible. If you need to switch to Sylveon to take a hit from... Okay, no, that's a bad example. If you need to switch to Vaporeon to take a hit from an opposing water, you have to switch to Vaporeon while using a water move, meaning you're not going to hit the opposing water very hard. It just gets really weird and wonky, especially if it's a special water that Leafeon doesn't want to tango with. You've got a couple of problems there. Generally, the issues with Mega Eevee are less able to be talked about in a vacuum. It's very much a toolbox where its exact strengths and weaknesses are going to vary matchup to matchup. It's kind of difficult to give exact explanations about it. But these are some good things to keep in mind. Counter-offensing Mega Eevee is incredibly possible. Choice Scarfers go a long way. Particularly if it's trying to do some weird things with its own speed stat. You can try Trailblaze to help fix the Scarfer problem, but I haven't found that to work super well. Exploiting the wonkiness of its moves is very possible, taking advantage of the fact that it can only attack physically with fire and grass options, and in general, just try to figure out what Eevee needs against your roster. Try to figure out its sequences. Learn what it's got to do against each member of your roster. See if you can find particular pivots that can, for example, come in on a Moonblast and not fear the Volt Switch that's immediately following. Entry hazards, priority, generic brawlers, they're going to go a long way. If you can find a resist berry, ooh, you could definitely take on some of Eevee's frailer forms. Sometimes Mega Eevee has to go to a reasonably frail form in order to actually hit the Pokemon in front of it. So if you can surprise it with either a berry or a choice scarf, or even just some speed investment that it didn't know you'd have, that can be a great way to knock Mega Eevee down for good. It's usually able to take one hit, but outside of its two deliberately tanking forms, it's going to be a struggle to take two. In conclusion, the Fox good. The Fox cannot do everything, and it does like its friendship, even though it can kind of be 8 Pokemon at once. No more than 4, given 4 moves, but in the team builder, it can be 8 Mon at once. Mega Eevee can go kind of crazy. There are a lot of teams that just fall prone to the elemental coverage of Mega Eevee's 8 potential attacking types. It's very good. It's not unbeatable. Even the Calm Mind variants aren't particularly unbeatable. It's reasonable to treat Mega Eevee like most other offensive threats. Scarfers are going to be a great bet. Finding neutral bulk might be your primary focus because everything has massive coverage these days. And having a plan will be a fantastic help in dealing with Mega Eevee. Even if that plan's a little bit ramshackle, something is better than nothing. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good one, y'all.